Hi everybody. First of all, and before speaking about topics of counter-terrorism, I would like to extend my sincere wishes of swift recovery to President Donald Trump and to the First Lady Melania Trump and to everyone who has contracted the COVID-19. This is a very harmful pandemic. It can happen to everyone, to me, to my family members. The world is facing three worldwide crises: the one of multilateralism, the health crisis, and the socio-economic one that has led to chaos all across the world. We have to stand as one, despite of all the difficulties and the conditions. We must remind ourselves that we are above all human beings, and that only together can we face this crisis until a vaccine is found. The COVID-19 has impacted our schedules. We have made so many restrictions and abided by so many conditions in order to go through these hard times. This pandemic is already considered the third most impactful event to the economy and the human activity at the global sphere during the last 106 years. After World War II from 1939 to 1945 and the combined events of World War I and the Spanish influenza from 1914 to 1920. Many consider it the third most critical event ever since the Industrial Revolution of 1830. Among the worst pandemics throughout history, we must remind that the Black Plague from 1346 to 1353 was the worst one, followed by the Justinian Plague that was between 541 AD to 549. The Spanish influenza is the third most critical one to mankind throughout history, and as I said, it took place right after World War I till 1920. Ever since then, we had some critical crises in terms of pandemics. I would mention the Hong Kong flu from 1968 to 1970. Then right after it, the second most critical one was the Asian flu that was spanned between 1957 and 1958. COVID-19 is considered already as the most critical pandemic of the 21st century. Among the things I want to mention before the topics of counterterrorism, as it has been a very hectic month of September in this matter, the cancellation of the Olympics of Tokyo 2020. Let's remind that this is the first time in the modern Olympic Games that we're gonna have Olympics taking place in an odd year, even though the label Tokyo 2020 is gonna stand for the event. There were past cancellations when it comes to the old Olympics between 776 BC and 393 AD. Those editions that were in odd years during that period were the one of 521 BC, the one of the years 17, 67, 81, 261, and the one of 393. The Christians at the time judged the games as a pagan activity that had to be abolished. Of course, in the modern times, after the long interruption of the games between 393 and 1896, there were also cancellations of the games during the events that were mentioned earlier. The 1916 Olympics due to World War I and the 1940 and 1944 Olympics due to World War II. So once again, very important to mention that we must stay together. We must consider 2021 as a year that starts now, between quotes 15 months year, where the action has to be done. The best must be done in order to get the vaccine ASAP and get back to the life that many has known in the Occidental world. I mentioned the United States ever since February 2020. In other parts of the world, a life that hasn't been known ever since November 2019. The development concept in general must be the focus of the 2020s, a decade that starts now. These efforts of the development must be at the same level of taking care of as much as the COVID-19 battle, and managing the plans to improve this kind of orientations of development for the 2030s and the 2040s must be also in the tables, to have a wide 2050 vision for the matter of development. Now, moving after this introduction to speak about the issues of counterterrorism and security, I would like to start with the summary of the United Nations General Assembly that concluded in New York last week. First of all, I would start with the approach of the United States to remind that it's very important in terms of diplomatic relation to have the United States works with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain in order to sign diplomatic relations with Israel. The rapprochement has been seen by the United States governments with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, as well as between Serbia and Kosovo. According to the United States, it's very important for the UN system to focus on real problems of the world that includes terrorism, religious persecutions, ethnic cleansing, and when it comes to religious minorities, in order to be an effective organization. $4.5 million were spent by the United States since 2017 on the military front in order to work within the counterterrorism and security task worldwide. There is also close work with Mexico and Central America to reduce crimes, and also the elimination of al-Baghdadi, the ISIS Caliphate leader, is a very important point that has been made by the United States. America is put first as much as other countries is put first, is the approach that is given by the United States governments in this context of action. When it comes to the approach of the United Nations, very important to mention the calling for a global ceasefire, as in the cases of Cameroon and Colombia, and this must be led by the United Nations Security Council. The peace process development in Sudan, South Sudan, and Afghanistan is also part of the UN workload. We must mention Libya and the issues that are related to the risk confrontations after violating the United Nations Security Council resolutions and the commitments made by the Libyans. Morocco is hosting a round of negotiations with the Libyans in order to work for the peace building in the country. I will go back to the efforts of Morocco later on when I come to the endeavors of the country and the contents of the next year when it comes to the speech of the Kingdom of Morocco at the General Assembly this year. Always with the approach of the United Nations, it's always important to remind the rule: where terrorism grows, it's hard to restore peace, like in the cases of the Lake Chad region in Africa. Regarding the position of Germany, that's part of the United Nations Security Council, there was an emphasis on international cooperation, in example in terms of ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, and also for the adoption of permanent solutions to conflicts. In the matter of Libya, Germany insisted on the fact that it's very important to prevent, via corporations, mercenaries from getting weapons from abroad, in reference to the Berlin process that took place last October. the Germans focused also on the resolution 2254 when it comes to Syria's crisis and its application that is leading to a nationwide ceasefire, humanitarian assistance, and justice versus the crimes against humanity. But that's not only for the example of Syria, Germany mentioned. France has insisted on the fact that with COVID-19 extremism is possibly growing up and that cooperation is a must, even between the United States and the People's Republic of China. Counter-terrorism and weapon proliferation is one of the main points that has been invoked by France during the United Nations the United Nations General Assembly. The French wants to maintain the position of the Vienna Accord vis-à-vis Iran, and emphasize that in 2018 at the United Nations General Assembly 73, President Macron already spoke about some points regarding this matter. The denuclearization is a sine qua non conditions for peace in the Korean Peninsula, added the letter of France. A counterterrorism constitutes collective security pillar in the example of Iraq's sovereignty after the fall of the caliphates. But the Daesh is still there, and the fight against it is very important in Iraq and in Syria as well. Mali also is in the headlines of the position of France at the foreign relation level. In terms of in restoring democracy and having the counter-terrorism in place, because democracy and counter-terrorism in Mali are always associated. In terms of peace of security, it's very important to go with the respect of sovereignty and the state of law. In example, the case of Lebanon, where the people must be heard and life must reshape socioeconomically as well. It's a country that is threatened by terrorism and had known, besides the COVID-19, one of the worst economic crises, plus the events that occurred recently in Beirut. President Macron also spoke about Libya and that the fact that there is at this point no transition process, and that there must be a focus on the fact that there is exporting terrorism from Syria through Libya, and the France works with Morocco and the United Nations Security Council to reach the ceasefire solution. This process includes also the endeavors of other North African countries. In terms of the situation with Turkey, there is a need of showing position towards Libya. President Macron specified, especially if we come back to what has been discussed in Ajaccio, in Corsica, regarding the Southern European Union countries summit. Very important to see that France is working also with Germany when it comes to the format Normandy in the case of Ukraine, and the fact that there is a need of democratic process in the Belarus in order to avoid extremism and socioeconomic chaos in this situation. Protecting common good is a beacon of sovereignty, and building new globalization era is very important at this time. The New World Order was very criticized and led to a financial and economic and social crisis during these last decades. The respect of international humanitarian law is a condition for the survival of the UN. It's very sad to notice, added France, that there are unacceptable actions in Syria, even by member states of the United Nations Security Council. France will establish an investigation regarding the issue of repression versus Muslims in Xinjiang, China. This is a point that I will speak about later on in this video outside of the United Nations General Assembly when it comes to the efforts of the Security Council in counter-terrorism, especially by the United States and the United Kingdom. I will move to also the importance of the Russian speech by President Putin that said that the United Nations Security Council should be more inclusive to more countries while continuing to serve as the cornerstone of global governance. The system works unlike the League of Nations previously, he added. Arms control is a focus, plus regional conflicts that are breaking down, and it's basically getting worse due to the COVID-19 outbreak. Digital technologies can fall like weapons in the hands of radicals, and not only at a regional level but also in other aspects internationally, and this will reinforce it's very important to reinforce the cybersecurity and the right of privacy and creating a consensus to halt cyber threats. I will get back to Russia later on in another third topic in the counterterrorism context, because it is the presidency of the United Nations Security Council for the month of October. In terms of the position of the Republic of Korea, very important to highlight that they are lauding the United States efforts with their summit with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. It's an important event for the peace process through dialogue in the Korean Peninsula. The Inter-Korean Summit is an important endeavor. There are 3 points that has been invoked already by the Republic of Korea at UNGA 74, which is zero tolerance for war, mutual security guarantee, prosperity via turning the DMZ in time a region for peace. Very important also to highlight the position now of Morocco at the United Nations General Assembly. So, of course, as many countries, Morocco has emphasized the fact that COVID-19 has been shown an ineffective and inconsistent international cooperation that joins the point of the crisis of multilateralism that I mentioned in the beginning of the video. His Majesty King Mohammed VI spoke about sustainable development as a solution to reduce crisis worldwide and decreasing conflicts. Undertaking reforms is a must in order to get result-oriented. Morocco stays proactive and preventive in its approach in terms of national policy. Africa relied on its own as well as in terms of emergency management during this time of crisis. Many countries were actually helped by the Kingdom of Morocco when it comes to the sub-Saharan region of Africa. Morocco focused also on climate change and on my topic, counter-terrorism, and the fact that given the complexity of contemporary conflicts, Morocco supports the UN peacekeeping endeavors. As I mentioned, Morocco and France are working together in cooperation with the UN to organize a second ministerial conference on peacekeeping for the Francophone countries. So they are not just working on the Libyan problem, but also in this matter as well, probably. Morocco's peaceful negotiations are then a very important point to mention when it comes to Libya. And the summary right now is that there is only a political solution with international supervision that will work amid the break-in of the Security Council resolutions in Libya and also the commitments by both parties. So the kingdom will play its role of mediation, and the next round of negotiations for the Libyan issue is expected also to have an important role of Morocco in this matter. So these are the key points that I would mention when it comes to the United Nations General Assembly 75, the one that I followed. It was a very hectic schedule. So many big points also were mentioned by other member states. But I will move right now to the issues of counter-terrorism that have been highlighted ever since this summer, and I will start with the United Nations Secretary General Virtual Week that took place in July, that was followed by an analysis of the threats of international peace and security that are caused by terrorist acts. Under the presidency of Indonesia, there was basically a briefing that have involved the UNSC and the CTED to speak regarding this important topic. So COVID-19 raising strategic concern to counterterrorism, that's a very important point, and the fact that ISIL activity has increased in Iraq and Syria, however, in non-conflict zone it has decreased due to the pandemic. COVID-19 has led to an increase of online threats by ISIL, and that's a very important point. The fact that ISIL expanded around ethnic groups, and besides the internet, there is the expansion in Libya, Mali, and Burkina Faso, and Niger. So ISIL exploits the disagreement context of action between the United States and Taliban, in example, in order to spread in Central Asia. This is something that must be supervised, and the UNOCT said that they work also with the UNICEF in terms of the issues of foreign terrorist fighters when it comes to Iraq and Syria in the matters of repatriation, prosecution, rehabilitation, and reintegration. Then after that, the CTED also spoke about the analytical brief on women, the rehabilitation and reintegration, and that they are focused on this work also with the UNOCT. And that ISIL is using basically gaming platforms as well online in order to spread its propaganda. There is a deep dive missions that have been taking place in Botswana, in Cote d'Ivoire, for the virtual threats. Botswana also had cases of using national mechanism in order to activate the counterterrorism task. A focus also about the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2462 was invoked by CTED when it comes to leading to a Reliance CTED report that was basically focused on these threats on international peace and security that are caused by terrorist acts. Then followed remarks by several member states in this matter that has been an important topic of the summer, by the Russian Federation, the United States, Vietnam, the United Kingdom, Belgium, South Africa, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Niger, the People's Republic of China, Germany, the Dominican Republic, Tunisia, Estonia, France, and Indonesia within the presidency of the United Nations Security Council. So Russia mentioned the point about the Security Council work and the Secretary General report that highlights the insufficient rate of repatriation right now. The United States spoke about the coalition efforts in counter-financing, counter-messaging, the repatriation of non-military actors, and also emphasized the fact that there must be tasks of identification and actions when it comes to ISIS, not only in Syria and Iraq, but also in West Africa and Southeast Asia. Plus, the United States raised a deep concern about the situation of the Muslims in China, as I mentioned earlier. And there was a very important point by the United States in this very important topic of the summer when it comes to counterterrorism. The counterterrorism can't be used versus religious freedom is the synthesis of this point of the representative of the United States. Vietnam spoke about the report of the Secretary General on the threat of Daesh that is welcomed, and that there is a need of a holistic approach and more commitment and more legal action. The United Kingdom, who is working closely with the United States and the United Arab Emirates to counter Daesh threats, and checking on the COVID-19 conflict zones, plus the national security measures that must be considered consistent with international law. Plus the fact that the UK also raised a very important concern when it comes to the situation of China, as I mentioned again. Belgium spoke about eliminating the radicalization that must be a long-term strategy, and the work on foreign terrorist fighters issue constitute a major point of security. Comprehensive approach on a military level plus contribution to decrease the Daesh threats. Financially, Belgium has contributed with a very strong budget in this matter. In the COVID-19 times, they must have strengthening issues when it comes to the coordination aspects, they added. The Republic of South Africa spoke about the women and children repatriation from Syria and Iraq, a topic that I invoked before in a previous video in terms of a report that spoke separately, one about the women and another one about the children. That was also a work of the CITED. In terms of addressing the root causes of extremism and the situation in Libya has also been raised by the representative of South Africa. This creates a fertile ground to growing terrorism in the African continent. As a leader in the continent, the Republic of South Africa also raised concern regarding the situation of Al-Shabaab in Somalia and the ones of Mozambique and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. St. Vincent and the Grenadines spoke about the fact that despite the defeat in Iraq and Syria, ISIL is still a threat in several other regions that is likely to increase with inequitably several fractions. COVID-19 has pushed for this matter to increase in the wrong direction, unfortunately. The cooperation and enhancing social inclusion, development of comprehensive strategies leading to resilient societies is a must, and there must be a full implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2462 that was the cornerstone of this briefing that has been added by the representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The People's Republic of China spoke about the ISIL spread in North Africa and exploiting the COVID-19 crisis in its form, and the fact that strengthening multilateralism will help in terms of counter-terrorism to succeed and focus on key issues such as foreign terrorist fighters, financing, and the internet. The German representative emphasized on the approach on fighting terrorism and the foreign terrorism fighters in particular as well, and continuing threats that is emanating from Daesh has been invoked on the table by the Germans, and being serious about the values of fighting terrorism. It's very important. Those are the 3 points that were mentioned by Germany.